The most powerful city on earth will rise on this rock. So why here? You are standing on the tip of a long, narrow island of rock and forest. There is no year here yet. Call it 500 years ago. Behind you, dense woods run north as far as you can see. In front of you, two wide arms of salt water fold around the land and open out toward the gray Atlantic. The wind smells of cold mud and the sea. There is no road. There is no road. There is no recognize. This is the southern tip of Manhattan. In 400 years, more people will live within sight of this spot than lived in the entire world when the first settlers paddled past it. The most powerful city on earth will rise on this rock. So why here? Why this island, and not the 1,000 other coves and river mouths along this coast? Look down at the water. That is the whole answer, and it is hidden in plain sight. The two arms of salt water are not just pretty. To your right is a long sound. To your left, a deep, wide channel. They wrap around the island and join below you in a vast, sheltered bay, screened from the open ocean by other islands and a narrow gap called the Narrows. The water here is deep. It almost never freezes. Storms break on the outer islands long before they reach the docks. In other words, you are standing on one of the finest natural harbors in the world. A great harbor is the first reason cities are born. A ship can come in heavy, sit calm, unload and leave. But a harbor alone is not enough. Many coasts have harbors. What turns a good harbor into a great city is what lies behind it. So turn around, face north, up the island, up the river. That river is the Hudson. And the Hudson is not an ordinary river. It is a tidal estuary, which means the ocean's salt water pushes up into it for roughly 150 miles inland. The native Lenape people called it the river that flows two ways. For a sailing ship, that is a gift. The tide carries you up. The tide carries you down. You can ride the Hudson deep into the land without a single road, a deep harbor at the mouth, a long navigable river reaching inland. Hold those two facts. The whole future of this city hangs on them. Now the people arrive. In 1609, an English captain named Henry Hudson, sailing for the Dutch, pushed his ship up that two-way river looking for a route to Asia. He did not find one. He found something the Dutch valued just as much. A land thick with beaver. Within a generation, the Dutch built a trading post on the very tip where you are standing. They called it New Amsterdam. It was small, muddy, and rough. A cluster of gabled houses around a fort, shipping beaver pelts back across the ocean. To protect themselves, in 1653, they built a wooden defensive wall across the island. The street that ran along it is still there. We call it Wall Street. 1664, English warships sailed through the Narrows. The Dutch governor surrendered without a shot. The town was renamed after the king's brother, the Duke of York. New Amsterdam became New York. And for the next 150 years it grew, slowly. Here is the part most people get wrong. For most of its early life, New York was not destined to be number one. It was one good port among several rivals. Boston had its merchants. Philadelphia was bigger and richer. Baltimore had its bay. Any of them could have become the great American city. New York had a wonderful harbor, yes, but so did others. So what tipped it? What single thing turned one good port into the capital of the modern world? To see it, you have to leave the harbor and look at a mountain wall. Run your eye down the map of eastern North America. From Maine all the way down to Alabama runs a long spine of mountains, the Appalachians. They are not tall, but they are wide, rugged, and almost unbroken, like a fence laid across the whole eastern edge of the continent. Behind that fence lies the real prize, a vast, flat, unbelievably fertile interior, the Great Lakes and the farmland beyond, land that could feed nations. And here is the cruel problem of the early United States. The wealth was inland. The ships were on the coast, and between them stood that mountain wall, hauling a ton of grain from the interior to the coast by wagon. Over those mountains could cost more than the grain was worth. The farms of the Midwest and the ports of the Atlantic might as well have been on different planets. Whichever city found a way through that wall first would own the door to a continent. Now look very closely at the mountains just north of New York. There is a flaw in the fence. The Hudson cuts straight up from the harbor, and near the city of Albany, a second river valley branches off to the west, the Mohawk Valley. Together, the Hudson and the Mohawk carve the one and only near sea level break through the entire Appalachian chain. Everywhere else you climb. Here, you can almost walk through on the level. Geography had left New York a secret door. For 200 years, nobody had walked through it. Then came the canal. In the early 1800s, a few stubborn New Yorkers, led by the state's governor, DeWitt Clinton, proposed something that sounded insane. They would dig a canal, not a short one. A canal 363 miles long, from the Hudson River at Albany, all the way west to Lake Erie at Buffalo. Threading straight through that Mohawk Gap in the mountains, critics laughed. They called it Clinton's Ditch. It was the longest canal in the world, dug mostly by hand and by horse, through forest and swamp and solid rock, by men who had never built a canal before. It took 8 years. On October 26, 1825, the Erie Canal opened, and the map of America changed overnight. Think about what that ditch actually did. Before the canal, moving goods from Buffalo to New York City took weeks and cost a fortune. After the canal, it took days and cost a small fraction as much. The price of shipping a ton of freight from the Great Lakes to the coast fell by around 90%. Suddenly, the entire interior of the continent had one cheap, easy outlet to the sea. And that outlet ran down the Mohawk, down the Hudson, and emptied out at one harbor, your harbor, New York's harbor. Now you can see the whole machine. The grain of the Midwest floats east through the gap in the mountains. It reaches the Hudson. It rides the two-way river down to that deep, sheltered, ice-free bay, and there ships from Europe are waiting to carry it across the ocean. New York had become the single point where a continent's interior met the world's oceans. The rivals never recovered. Boston and Philadelphia were still walled off by the mountains. New York alone held the open door, and the city exploded. Watch the footprint grow. Money poured into the port, and the port pulled in everything else. Banks to finance the trade, warehouses to store it, factories, newspapers, shipping lines. People came to do the work. The city had already laid out its famous grid of streets in 1811, ruler straight blocks marching north up the island, ready to be filled. Now they filled fast. Then came the immigrants, millions of them, arriving by ship through the same harbor that started everything. By the time Ellis Island opened its immigration station in 1892, New York was the front door of America. Whole neighborhoods rose in a generation. In 1898, the city swallowed its neighbors, joining Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island into one enormous metropolis. The land ran out. So the city did the only thing left. It went up. Steel frames climbed into the sky, and the island that had been forest and beaver pelts grew the most famous skyline on Earth. A muddy Dutch trading post had become the financial capital of the planet. So look at it now. More than 8 million people in the city itself, around 20 million in the wider region, towers of glass standing where the wall once ran. The harbor still busy below them, the Hudson still flowing two ways, the tide still rising and falling against the same tip of rock where you began. None of it was an accident, not really. The harbor gave the city a door to the ocean. The Hudson gave it a road into the land, but it was that one narrow gap in the mountains, opened by one improbable canal, that decided New York, and not anyone else, would become the place where a continent met the sea. You are standing on the tip of that long, narrow island. The forest is gone. The fort is gone. The wall is only a street name now. But the water is exactly where it always was, folding around the land and opening to the Atlantic, quietly explaining, if you know how to look, why 20 million people are standing here with you.